Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Snowden. A warm welcome from the University of Cologne on a very historic date for civil liberties, not only because you're going to talk with us and discuss with us, but also because the German Parliament finally passed the Marriage Equality Act today. The University of Cologne is one of the oldest and largest universities, and what we did not let you know before, the largest institution for teachers training in Europe. So we have a lot of multipliers, future multipliers, people responsible for teaching our children here in the audience, and I think this makes it a very special occasion and discussion. Over 2,500 students and guests have come together tonight to discuss the topic courage with you. You personally have made a very tough choice, deciding to tell the truth and paying a high price for it. You've shown courage by blowing the whistle, and your example can help everybody to learn how to make ethical decisions. Without further much ado, I leave the room and the stage to you. We're very excited to hear what you have to tell us and look forward to the discussion. And thanks again so much for taking the time for us.
Thank you. Thank you. This is an extraordinary time. When we look around at everything happening in the world, we see this clash of ideologies, we see this clash of viewpoints in every form, on every topic, where there's the largest division, not between this particular group of people within our society at the public level, at the personal level, but largely between authority and civility, between great power and between the private individuals, be they citizens or be they travelers, migrants, people who are stateless. What is so remarkable about this division is for so long in the last century, we have seen governments speaking so frequently as the agents of progress. If not in fact, at least in rhetoric, they told us to aim higher, to go further, that we would be blazing new trails, expanding the borders and boundaries of human rights and progress to create a better future for everyone everywhere that is more open, more free, less vulnerable, not only to our own prejudices, but to the challenges that we face as a world. And something has changed in these last decades. We are witnessing the construction of a world in which the most common political value is becoming fear. From Washington to Moscow, from Beijing to even Berlin, we're all too frequently hearing the most powerful officials arguing that we are living in the midst of a period of unprecedented danger, threats that we've never seen before. They're today greater than ever, and therefore things must change. Even in times of existential threat, we didn't hear rhetoric like this. Since the turning of the millennium, the last decade, this has given rise to a new creeping authoritarianism, a belief that the single most important factor in determining the direction of our society are the desires of governments alone, of power, of influence, of control, where the morality of a given thing, of a policy, has become less important than the mere lawfulness of it. Hard-won prohibitions against torture, assassination, indiscriminate surveillance are being overturned or ignored on the basis of nothing more than a claim, an untested claim that they have become necessary because these times are so dangerous. After all, it's quite persuasive to many that when you live in a world of terrorists and madmen, a world where your nearest neighbor is potentially a foreign enemy, where a truck is a national security threat, rights look very much like a vulnerability. Now, there was a time when I myself did not question this kind of thinking, so long as it originated with a government that I trusted. After all, I grew up in a federal family in the United States. My father worked for the military, retiring after more than 30 years. My grandfather retired as an admiral. Then he went to work for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, sort of our internal intelligence service, a state security agency. My mother worked and still works for the federal courts. Indeed, I myself volunteered for the United States Army during time of war, and shortly afterwards, I joined the ranks of my country's spies, working first for the CIA, interestingly not too far from here over in Switzerland in Geneva. And I continued to climb in my career to higher and higher levels of access in and awareness of these intelligence services until I finally came to work personally with the tools of what I call global mass surveillance at the NSA. What I found at that desk, where I could see everyone's communications being collected indiscriminately in my own country, in your country, and everywhere else, was enough to overcome all the years of patriotically cultivated lack of suspicion, a lack of skepticism, that natural incuriosity that prevents us from questioning things which might be unpopular. If you were to do so, you would rock the boat. You would be seen as inconvenient or perhaps radical, unserious. But there's a level of incivility, of inhumanity, of injustice that we can all accept, that we can internalize and compartment, keep aside from our daily lives, and allow us to continue that convenient lack of awareness. And then there's one step beyond. And it was during my time at the NSA, it was there, ladies and gentlemen, upon learning that we were violating not only the Constitution of the United States, but the fundamental rights of every man, woman, and child around the world whose lives were touched by technology. It was there that I rediscovered the importance of asking questions, even when they are unpopular, perhaps even because they are unpopular. It was there that I found the courage to disagree. And I do disagree. The basic premise enabling today's modern work of mass surveillance, that our rights are too burdensome and therefore dangerous to be respected, is established as clearly in the minority opinion of the Bundestag's NSA committee report, which was just released this week, as it was 4 years ago in my own country. And it is still wrong. If the strategy of our nations to defend against each new threat is to do away with the very values that have in our rhetoric differentiated the noble us from the wicked them, we have protected nothing. We have diminished not only our own society, but the very idea of enlightened civilization, which generations of lives have been sacrificed to realize. If we allow the preferences of a few officials operating behind closed doors to replace the basic constitutional principles upon which our governments are founded, we are not citizens. We are subjects. We are meant to be partner to government. We are meant to direct our government. In every democracy, they derive the legitimacy of every office and every law from a single principle, the consent of the governed. But that consent is only meaningful when it is uninformed. If we are not told what is truly happening, if we are not told the kind of powers and policies that are being carried out, not only in our name, but being used against us, we are losing our chair at the table of government. We are losing our place in our own society. Moreover, even if we were to agree with this kind of thinking, even if we were to say the relatively rare risk of terrorism that claims far fewer lives in our countries than things like heart disease, like traffic accidents, in many cases like bathtub falls and lightning strikes. Even if we were to consider this a wise strategy, we must never forget that there are limits to what can be authorized by law. Now, that might sound radical, but for example, what does it mean when our oaths and obligations come into conflict with one another? There are many times within the life of a nation where it becomes convenient for a government to assert that a new inferior law, something at the statute level, justifies the abrogation or limitation of a superior right, something that is established at the level of basic law, fundamental laws, constitutional laws. Now, the father of one method of resistance to these kind of abdications of public responsibility by the government, this idea of civil disobedience, was an American philosopher named Henry David Thoreau. He argued that resistance to such laws is a duty that rests upon the shoulders of every individual, that we should cultivate skepticism to inoculate ourselves against the natural inclination towards patriotism that can blind us to injustice and in fact make us party to it. He said, "It is not desirable to cultivate a respect for the law so much as for the right. The only obligation which I have a right to assume is to do at any time what I think right. Law never made a man a whit more just, and by means of our respect for it, even the well-disposed are daily made the agents of injustice. More simply, the law is no substitute for conscience. Saying so does not make us anarchists. It makes us realists. Policy is the product of ordinary men. Certainly, one need not look back very far in our history to find examples of abuse and inhumanity that were clearly immoral. And yet we would do well to remember that from all of these examples, from the violent institutions of slavery, genocide, the disenfranchisement of women, to modern prohibitions that are finally being torn apart today through the resistance, the protest, the activism of so many people, as we have seen in this marriage equality law today in Germany, about who and how one can love one another within their private relationships, within their own homes. We should remember that at all times in history, these policies of violence and discrimination were just as perfectly legal as they were immoral. And while we are able to make progress, while we are able to reform and banish into history some of these discriminations, we see other new ones rising today. When we look, for example, at the attacks on the press that are becoming increasingly popular in the United States, not from some fringe organizations, but from the very president himself, we see echoes of what we've seen in more authoritarian countries, such as Russia, for so long already. The foreign agent law, as they call it, here in Moscow, demands that any non-governmental organization, a civil society organization that advocates for this or that policy, that receives any amount of funding from abroad, has to announce themselves with a kind of label that makes them sound as if they're foreign spies, even if they may be trying to simply promote social work, even if they may be trying to establish new norms of protection for minority groups. And this may be no surprise to the people sitting in the room. You go, oh, that's Russia. But we see this increasingly happening in deeper parts of Europe. We see this same kind of foreign agent registration scheme happening in Hungary, where the president there wants to shut down certain groups and universities that produce a kind of thinking, a kind of argument that is uncomfortable for him. We see in the United Kingdom, under the Prime Minister Theresa May, the passage and establishment of the most extreme surveillance laws in the history of Western society. And we have to ask ourselves at every moment, what is next? When we read the newspaper, when we look to our conversations and communities and we see the changes that are occurring, we need to ask ourselves not only what is legal, not only what is responsible, not only what is reasonable, but what is moral. I say that the lesson this moment, our moment, seeks to teach this generation once again that we have forgotten so many times in so many generations throughout our story. This lesson today is that the support of a majority, the passage of a law, does not by magic transform a wrong into a right. And that dispossessing a minority of basic liberties, or perhaps entire populations of their privacy, does not become permissible simply because it is popular. Sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, the only moral choice is to break the law. If that time comes to you, if you are confronted with such a circumstance in your country, in your life, I would say, remember, it is not enough to believe in something. It is not enough to recognize that an injustice is an injustice, that a wrong is a wrong, and to support that which is right. There are times when we have not just the right, but the obligation to stand for something. To be that first person to say, I disagree. When this moment comes to you, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that you be not just wise, but brave. One voice, your voice, can change the world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and being inspiring, and I think you're conquering the hearts and minds of the audience here. I hope that got through, and you saw that over 1,200 people are fascinated, inspired, and already now certain to take something away tonight. Now I would like to share some of the questions which we have picked for tonight. The first question comes from Tim Metzler, who's studying psychology at the University of Bonn. And he's asking, since you leaked all your information about mass surveillance, it even increased, at least here in Germany. Just a few days ago, the German government passed a law that allows state Trojans, even for people who just communicate with suspects. Why do you think the people are not on the streets against that? Are you frustrated that the impact of your revelation somehow evaporates at the moment, at least in the vast majority of the population? So that's Tim's question to Ed Snowden.
So the first thing to understand here is why I was motivated to come forward. I did not want to elect myself president of the world. I did not want to say, these should be the laws, this is how they should change, and I will work to set these new laws into action. What I wanted to do was to provide necessary public information, to return public information to public hands that had been kept secret, that had been denied to us, so we could not decide for ourselves the way that things should be. Now, there has been a significant positive progress in the last several years, but it's often difficult to see because, sadly, it is not originating in legislatures. We did get some modest reforms in the United States. We do get some new resolutions and parliamentary statements here and there. But we have to recognize at all times, we cannot look to the law alone to protect us. The law is important, and absolutely we want the protections of the law. But as we move into this new and uncertain future, where the law is so frequently justifying bases to present some kind of threat towards us, where our technology can be turned against us, we need to look for new means of enforcing human rights, new mechanisms by which we can guarantee our rights will be respected. These may be through science, they may be through technology, they may be through activism and traditional methods. But it is important to remember that, yes, for example, your communications on the internet have become more secure by default, invisibly, in the last years. More than 50% of the world's communications are now encrypted as they cross sort of the dangerous zone of the internet. That was not the case before. But it's not enough. And it does beg this question of, should we be discouraged? And I would say no. Don't be discouraged. Be motivated. When you see a challenge, when you see a threat, when you see a problem, recognize that there are no heroes in this world. To look for heroes is to presume that there is a different kind of person out there that can do what you cannot. And this is not true. This happened to me when I was sitting at the National Security Agency, talking to my colleagues and coworkers, telling them what was going on, and saying, you know, who should we tell about this? What should we do? And they would say, don't rock the boat. You know what happens to people that speak up. The bottom line is that history is waiting for you. There is no perfect person out there. There is no saintly figure. There are no heroes. In fact, there are heroes in choice. You are never more than one decision away from doing something great for the world. So make that moment now.
Let's get a bit more practical about protecting ourselves out there in the digital space. The next question from Moritz Niemann, who's studying sociology here at the philosophical faculty at the University of Cologne, asked, what are 3 must-have tools everyone should be using in order to protect one's cyber identity? Why do you think most people are still not using those tools to protect their online privacy?
I think the most important tool is actually a password manager. This may sound like a very simple kind of thing, but it's really quite critical, because when we think on the security, the typical security threats that the ordinary person faces today, a site gets compromised, gets hacked, one of your passwords gets recorded, and then this password is reused for your Facebook, for your Google, for everything else. One password unites all of your accounts. A password manager is a simple program that allows you to use one password that unlocks instead a database of passwords. So your Facebook now has an unbreakable password, your Google Gmail has an unbreakable password, your iCloud account, everything has its own very strong, very reliable password. And all you have to remember is one. People aren't using this because it's not provided by default. People aren't security experts, and they should not be expected to go and look for these things. We shouldn't be using passwords where we remember 1,000 different things. We should have a passphrase, a strong one, something that will be remembered by us and used by us throughout large periods of our lives, that can then provide us access to many different things. The second is two-factor authentication. If a hacker, for example, compromises your computer, whether they're government, whether they're criminal, if they have your password alone and they've stolen this, and you're not logged into this account on this machine, they won't be able to log directly into the account unless they have also compromised or are able to bypass the two-factor authentication a second device, for example, your cellular phone. Right? This is not to say that two-factor authentication is perfect, but you're increasing the difficulty of compromising your device exponentially, because no longer does an attacker have to compromise one device, they have to compromise 2. This is a critical protection. The third is we should all be using end-to-end encrypted messengers, right? The one that I recommend that works for most people is called Signal. It's completely free. It's Android, iOS. I'm, of course, not paid by any messenger to make these kind of recommendations, but it's called the Signal Messenger. This allows you to call people and have your voice calls protected so that no one else can listen to them unless they actually compromise the phones directly, they hack them. They can't simply listen to the call as it crosses the internet or go to Facebook and say, we would like a copy of this conversation, we would like a copy of this chat. These are things that all people can be using immediately and directly. And none of them cost anything. There is one last one, we'll say a fourth one, that is just as important, and it's different. It's not technical. When you think about all of these security threats, all of these dangers, particularly the ones that are originating from corporations and private industries seeking to spy on you, or governments that want to control and influence you. It is political influence. We don't have time in all of our lives to become security experts, to become activists, to become specialists that know what all the threats are in these new and abstract technologies. Although we should learn to make sure that we are at least conversant, we understand the basic principles that will protect us. We need a professional class that protects our societies, that protects our communities, not just within our nations, not just within our countries, but beyond borders. These groups exist. Whether we're talking about, for example, ECCHR or the ACLU in the United States, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights is an example of an organization that is constantly and tirelessly working to advance the public interest, but they cannot do it alone. These are small organizations that have very little support, that have very little funding. If we do not have the time or expertise to solve these problems ourselves, I would ask you to support these organizations to do it on your behalf.
Thank you. We're closing off. We're closing off with a rather personal question at the end, which was asked by Frida Berg. Dear Mr. Snowden, is there a specific author or thinker or a specific work of literature which has contributed in hindsight to your personal development, a story or a personality which has inspired you deeply?
You know, it would be easy to cite something like Orwell's 1984. Or the more insightful Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. But I think it's not enough to look towards the examples of the problems, of the dystopias, of the mistakes that lead society down a path of harm and consequence. But to look back to mythology, look back to our oral tradition of recognizing the themes in every story, in every time, in every point in our history, where ordinary people who have no special talents, special circumstances, no great destiny, recognize that they still have a role to play, that they have influence, that they have capability to change. And for me, this would be Joseph Campbell's recounting of sort of what he describes as the monomyth, the idea of the hero with 1,000 faces. That when you look at all of these great figures throughout history, when you look at all of these people who are lauded for courage, whether we're talking about in literature and fiction, or whether we're talking about our modern moment in nonfiction, it is not destiny or some exceptional quality that produces these people. There is nothing that separates you from them. Don't raise them up as heroes. I am not a hero. I am a citizen, and so are you. By recognizing this, by embracing this, you recognize each and every moment, each and every injustice that you witness is an opportunity for you to make the world better. It may be in a small way, it may be in a tiny way, it may be in a way that no one ever notices, for which you are never thanked, and for which you may suffer, perhaps in an ongoing and historic way. But that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. In fact, that is the only thing that has ever been worth doing. What we need to seek to do is not to save the world, is not to change history in a single dramatic action, but to lay down a single stone, to place a brick upon which others can lay their brick. Together, We represent the foundation of the future. And we can create something that lasts. A structure that protects not just us, but the generations that follow us. And they can enter this home, our temple, to a free and open world that will ensure that they enjoy for themselves not just the rights that we ourselves were so fortunate to inherit, but a wider body of broader rights, a more open world where we are not afraid, we are encouraged, where we are not frightened by these new politics of threats and dangers. We are ready because we recognize that the future belongs to those who act. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It is so sad that we're reaching the end of our time that we're sharing with you. Just one, I don't know, I hope we still have you and you can hear the final sentence. Anyway, if you can hear it, if not, it's also good for the rest. There he is, there he is. We promise to keep your timetable and your other commitments, but one more sentence. In 2014, you've been awarded the Right Livelihood Award, the so-called Alternative Nobel Prize. The Right Livelihood Award diploma is still waiting for you on the chimney sill at the Foundation House in Stockholm. We are confident that one day you will be able to pick it up as a free man, and we all hope that day will be sooner than later. Thank you so much for sharing your time and thoughts, and all the best to you.
Thank you so much. I hope the next year I'll see you in Germany.